Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Carnodal. The American Tort Reform Foundation has labeled Pennsylvania as the nation's worst judicial hellhole in a new report. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's Christina Lingell. Christina, what did this report look at to determine what it calls judicial hellholes?
So it looked at a variety of factors, including the size of awards being given to people who are filing lawsuits. It looked at how different legal precedents make this state more or less litigation friendly. They also looked at how much lawyers are spending in this state to advertise for clients to file malpractice suits and other types of lawsuits. So it was a pretty comprehensive view. And a lot of what they looked at was the cost to the taxpayer in supporting this sort of civil system and in the costs that are added into services and products that they engage with.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit more. What are the wider impacts of civil suits?
One of the biggest ones is definitely in the healthcare industry. So we see a lot of malpractice suits happening, and when doctors are faced with a lot of malpractice suits, then they have to obviously have liability insurance. The cost of that insurance and the cost to the system overall drives up healthcare costs, which is kind of a cyclical problem because then you have these exorbitant healthcare costs so that if something catastrophic does happen to a person and they can't afford to pay for it, well, then the next logical step is to file a lawsuit. So that's a huge part because that affects everyone. Other downstream effects, like one of the big concerns that people have been talking about in Pennsylvania specifically is how to make it a place that's more appealing to businesses. So the concern is that if you're in a state where lawsuits are really rampant, then you don't want to open up a business there. You don't want to open yourself up to that kind of liability. So that's potential jobs lost and potential revenue lost. It also, they say, can stifle innovation because people are concerned about what would happen if they do X, Y, or Z.
And what efforts are being made to reform the tort system, and what problems do reformers hope to target?
So efforts are being made to reel in the amount that can be awarded. People in Pennsylvania are concerned about a Supreme Court ruling that opened up the door for suits to be filed wherever a business operates instead of where an incident specifically happened. So because people view Philadelphia as a city that's friendlier towards those sorts of malpractice suits, we've seen a huge uptick in suits being filed there for things that might have happened outside the city, as long as, like, if it's a medical group or any other kind of industry that operates somewhere else in the state, if they have that location in Philadelphia, then people can file there. So that's something people want to see change. People who are looking for reform are pretty against the idea of what they call regulation through litigation. So what happens is there's a lot of situations where people don't have much recourse, especially when you look at really big issues like healthcare or environmental issues. And so you'll see a lot of lawsuits, and we've seen this with gun reform. So we don't have gun reform, so people sue gun companies because they don't see the legislature doing anything to resolve what they see as a problem. And reformers are basically saying, hey, we need the legislation to take care of this stuff. Like, we need actual healthcare reform or gun reform or environmental regulations, rather than having all of these individuals create this huge financial burden by suing as their only option. And one of the people who's looking for reform is Representative Torrin Ecker, who's in central Pennsylvania. And he's proposing legislation that's supported by insurance groups and other businesses who are hoping to, again, help Pennsylvania's economy by making it more appealing to businesses.
What other states made the top of the American Tort Reform Foundation's list alongside Pennsylvania?
So number 2 was actually New York City. So not the entire state, but just the city. There have been a lot of fraud claims that have gone up, especially since COVID. They've seen huge networks of people who are trying to scam the system. Number 3 was South Carolina, and the report largely focused on their asbestos litigation. Number 4 was Georgia, which they cited having really big awards. California was up there too. They look at novel theories of liability, which, are creative ways that lawyers find to say that somebody is responsible for an injury or loss or something to that effect that have not occurred previously in law.
Christina, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.